Did you know my daddy?
The little girl's trembling voice cut through the cold October wind like a blade through glass, fragile, impossible to ignore, and destined to change everything that came after. If stories of redemption, family, and second chances touch your heart, please subscribe and stay with us until the very last chapter of this journey. The leaves in Graceland Cemetery whispered with every breath of the Chicago wind. It was early morning. Gray light filtered through the sycamores, and a thin layer of mist clung to the carved angels and weathered gravestones. Benjamin Carter, CEO of Carter Holdings, stood before one particular marble headstone. Peter Michael Harrison, 1989-2020. Beloved brother, husband, son. Ben had read those words 100 times, but they still hollowed him out. His fingers brushed the cold stone, and a familiar ache crawled up his chest, the one that came every time he wondered if Peter's death had been his fault. Survivor's guilt, his therapist had called it, a corporate term for emotional bankruptcy. He exhaled slowly, eyes wet, when a movement caught his attention, a small figure kneeling a few yards away. A little girl, maybe 7, in a worn pink coat too thin for the wind. She was whispering something to the same headstone. Ben's breath hitched. "Excuse me, sweetheart. Are you lost?" The girl turned. Her eyes were wide and bright, gray-blue like Peter's had been. She hugged a faded stuffed rabbit against her chest. "No, sir, I'm waiting for my daddy. His name is Peter Harrison." The world stopped. For a moment, even the wind seemed to hush. Ben knelt beside her, heart pounding. "Where's your mom?" "She's sick," the girl said softly. "She told me to wait here because this is where Daddy sleeps. She said maybe someone would come who knew him." Her lower lip trembled. "Did you know my daddy?" Ben's voice broke. "Yes," he whispered. "I knew him very well." He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but none seemed gentle enough for this fragile child in front of him. Instead, he offered his hand. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily. Lily Monroe." The name struck him like lightning. Peter had dated a woman named Grace Monroe years ago, a quiet nurse who'd vanished from their lives right before Peter married Victoria Hale. But Grace had disappeared before the wedding, leaving behind only a short voicemail Ben had ignored. "Please tell him I didn't want to cause trouble." Now, years later, a little girl with Peter's eyes stood in front of him, shivering beside the grave. Ben swallowed hard. "Lily, does your mom know you're here?" "She said she was going to the clinic. I waited a long time." The girl's small hand gripped his sleeve. "She said Daddy would never leave me alone again." The phrase stabbed through him. Never leave me alone again. Ben looked around. The cemetery was almost empty, just the hum of distant traffic and the rustle of dying leaves. His instinct as a CEO, risk assessment, immediate response, overrode his paralysis. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her. "Come on, Lily, let's get you warm. We'll find your mom." She hesitated, clutching the stuffed rabbit. "Will Daddy be mad if I go?" Ben smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart. I think he'd want me to take care of you." As he guided her through the gates of Graceland, the sky above the lake began to lighten. He glanced back once more at Peter's name carved in stone, feeling, for the first time, that maybe his brother's unfinished story had just begun again. Inside his chest, something stirred, a forgotten promise to protect what Peter had loved. He didn't yet know that the decision to take the child's hand would drag him into a web of grief, inheritance, and redemption that would test every truth he thought he knew. By the time they reached his black sedan parked along Clark Street, Lily was asleep against his shoulder. Her tiny breaths fogged the window as he started the engine. Ben looked at her reflection in the glass, those unmistakable eyes, that quiet strength, and whispered, "Peter, what did you do?" The city was waking up around them, unaware that inside this car, a billionaire's guilt and a little girl's hope had just collided, beginning a battle not for money or power, but for family, justice, and the fragile miracle of healing. The back of the yard's neighborhood in Chicago woke slowly. Smoke curling from old brick chimneys, the scent of fried onions from corner diners, and the faint echo of a train clattering down the red line. It was a district that carried history like scars, meatpacking plants long gone, jobs that never returned, and walls that whispered stories of people who kept surviving anyway. Benjamin Carter parked his car beside a weathered tenement on West 47th Street. The building leaned slightly, as if weary from too many winters. Apartment 3C, Lily had said. He carried the little girl up the dim staircase, her hand gripping his thumb tightly. "It's this one," she whispered, pointing to a chipped green door with a paper taped across it. Final notice. Payment required. Ben's chest tightened. He knocked. A few seconds passed before the latch clicked. The door opened a few inches. A woman stood there, pale and fragile, her head wrapped in a faded scarf. Her eyes, tired but defiant, darted between Ben and Lily. "Mommy!" Lily ran forward and hugged her waist. The woman stumbled slightly but smiled through her exhaustion. "Lily, where were you? I told you to wait." Her voice faltered when she looked up at Ben. "And you are?" "Benjamin Carter," he said gently. "I found your daughter at Graceland Cemetery. She was alone, by a grave. She said her father's name was Peter." For a moment, everything went still. Then Grace's hands began to tremble. "Peter Harrison." Ben nodded. "He was my brother." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She turned away, bracing herself against the kitchen counter cluttered with prescription bottles and medical forms. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and instant coffee. On the wall, taped above the table, were dozens of envelopes marked "overdue" from hospitals, collection agencies, and the City of Chicago's water department. Lily clung to her mother's skirt. "Mommy, I told you someone would come." Ben stepped inside quietly. "You're Grace Monroe?" She nodded, lowering herself into a chair. "I used to be a nurse at St. Anthony Hospital, but I haven't worked in a while." Her fingers brushed against a port under her collarbone. "Ovarian cancer, stage 3. Carboplatin and paclitaxel every 3 weeks. They placed a portacath last year. I'm on my 4th cycle now." Her tone was clinical, detached, the voice of someone who had learned to speak her own prognosis like a case file. Ben looked around. The refrigerator hummed weakly, its surface covered in Lily's drawings, crayons and hearts, a stick figure family labeled Mommy plus Lily plus Angel Daddy. His throat tightened. "Grace," he said softly, "I didn't know about you. Peter never mentioned." Her eyes hardened. "Of course he didn't. When I told him I was pregnant, he panicked. He said he'd fix things, that he'd come back. But he never did." She looked down at her trembling hands. "Then I heard he'd married someone else." Ben sank into the opposite chair. "Victoria Hale." Grace nodded once. "I didn't want trouble. I kept Lily's last name as mine. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted her to know her father wasn't a bad man, just a scared one." The silence between them was heavy, only broken by the distant wail of sirens outside. Finally, Ben spoke. "Grace, I'd like to help. Not just with money, though I can take care of that. I mean real help. Medical care. Legal protection." She shook her head weakly. "Mr. Carter, you don't owe us anything." "Maybe not," he replied quietly. "But I owe Peter. And I owe that little girl a chance at something better." Grace studied him, her eyes searching for deceit. All she found was sincerity, raw and unfamiliar. She looked at Lily, who was coloring quietly on the floor, then back at Ben. "If you really want to help," she said, her voice trembling, "make sure she's not alone when I can't be here anymore." Her words landed like a stone in his chest. He met her gaze steadily. "You're not going anywhere, Grace. Not if I can help it." She smiled faintly, though her pallor was ghostly. "Hope doesn't respond to chemo, Mr. Carter." Ben exhaled, standing slowly. "Then we'll find something stronger." He looked around again. The peeling paint, the stack of bills, the courage it took this woman to keep breathing. For the first time in years, he felt more human than powerful. As he left the apartment later that afternoon, the sky over the south side had turned to copper. Lily waved from the window, her small hand pressed to the glass. Behind her, Grace sat in the fading light, the scarf slipping slightly to reveal her thinning hair, proof of battles still being fought. Ben paused on the cracked sidewalk, looking up at the worn brick building. Somewhere inside, he'd seen both the cost of silence and the possibility of redemption. And as the first chill of evening crept in, he made a quiet promise to himself. This time, no one connected to Peter would be left behind. The elevator at Northwestern Memorial Hospital hummed softly as it rose toward the genetics and molecular pathology floor. Benjamin Carter had stood in hundreds of boardrooms, negotiated mergers worth billions, but that morning he couldn't stop his hands from shaking. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Beside him, Grace Monroe sat in a wheelchair, her scarf neatly tied, her face pale but calm. Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit, swinging her feet nervously. Ben cleared his throat. "They'll just take a small sample. It won't hurt." "I'm not afraid," Lily said, brave but small. "I just don't want Mommy to be tired." Grace smiled faintly. "I'll be fine, sweetheart." The elevator doors opened onto a bright corridor lined with framed medical awards. The sign read, "Department of Genetic Diagnostics, Authorized Access Only." A nurse guided them into a quiet consultation room. Stainless steel instruments gleamed under fluorescent lights. On the desk lay consent forms, a sealed kit, and an empty evidence bag labeled Chain of Custody. Ben adjusted his tie, his voice low. "So, this test, it can tell if I'm really—" The nurse nodded politely. "An avuncular test determines if you share a genetic relationship as uncle and niece. Since the alleged father is deceased, we compare your DNA with the child's. Accuracy is around 99.9% when the chain of custody is intact." She gestured to the form. "We'll need your signature here, Mr. Carter, to authorize specimen collection under Illinois law." He signed. His pen felt heavier than any contract he'd ever handled. As the samples were taken, one swab from his cheek, one from Lily's, Grace watched quietly from the corner. Her hands trembled slightly on the armrest. When the nurse left with the evidence bag, sealing it with a tamper-proof sticker, Grace finally spoke. "You don't have to do this, Ben." He met her eyes. "I do. For both of you. And for Peter." Her gaze softened, but there was an exhaustion beyond words. "You think a test can fix everything?" "No," he admitted. "But truth has to start somewhere." 3 days later, the results came back. Ben sat alone in the sky lobby of the hospital, 34 floors above the city. The skyline stretched across the horizon. Lake Michigan glittered beneath an overcast sky, and the wind off the lake rattled the tall glass windows. He opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper stamped Confidential, Genetic Relationship Report. Probability of relatedness, 99.92%. Avuncular relationship, confirmed. Interpretation. Strong evidence supports that Benjamin Carter is the biological uncle of minor child Lily Monroe. His breath caught. For a long time he couldn't move. All the guilt, all the questions that had eaten at him since Peter's death, why he'd covered up that final business scandal, why he hadn't answered Peter's last call, suddenly came crashing back. He pressed his hand against the glass. Below, Michigan Avenue buzzed with morning traffic, taxis and buses weaving through the city. But up here, the world was silent. Peter, you left a child behind, he thought. And maybe you left her so I could find her. Grace's voice from the day before echoed in his head. Make sure she's not alone when I can't be here. Ben folded the paper slowly and slipped it back into the envelope. Then he called the lab technician. I want a notarized copy of the result and an affidavit for potential court submission. The technician hesitated. Court? You intend to open a probate case? Ben's jaw tightened. If that's what it takes to protect them, yes. He looked out at the lake again, its color shifting between blue and steel gray, and felt something shift within himself. For years, his empire had been built on control, spreadsheets, contracts, precision. But life, it turned out, didn't care for control. Grace's cancer couldn't be solved with a check. Lily's eyes couldn't be explained by data. Yet this one sheet of paper, signed and sealed, was proof that he wasn't imagining redemption. It was real, written in blood. When he returned to the apartment that evening, Grace was sitting by the window, the city lights reflected in her tired eyes. He handed her the envelope silently. She opened it, read the words, and exhaled. So it's true. Ben nodded. She's family, and that means she's my responsibility. Grace smiled faintly. You sound like a man who's finally found his purpose. He looked at Lily, asleep on the couch with her rabbit. Maybe she found it for me. Outside, the Chicago night deepened, the hum of the city blending with the quiet rhythm of their breathing. And for the first time in years, Benjamin Carter didn't feel alone. The Hale estate in Lincoln Park stood like a fortress. 3 stories of red brick, white columns, and polished windows reflecting the gold of the October sun. It was the kind of house that didn't belong to a person, but to a reputation. And that reputation now had teeth. Benjamin Carter stood at the gates, his coat pulled tight against the wind off Lake Michigan. He hadn't planned on coming here alone, but some battles had to be fought without lawyers. The door opened before he even reached the porch. Victoria Hale, widow of Peter Harrison, stepped out. She was 32, elegant in a black silk blouse, her posture carved from ice. Behind her stood Theodore Blackwood, her private attorney, an older man with eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Benjamin, Victoria greeted, her voice smooth but cold. I heard rumors you've been visiting some rather interesting neighborhoods lately. Care to explain? Ben's jaw tightened. You deserve to hear it from me. I found a child, Peter's child. For a second, she blinked, then laughed, a dry, brittle sound. How convenient. A child appearing 4 years after his death? It's not a rumor, he said quietly. Her name is Lily Monroe. The DNA test confirmed she's Peter's biological daughter. 99.9% probability. Theodore interjected smoothly. Do you have the report? Ben handed him a notarized copy. The lawyer scanned it, eyes narrowing. Avuncular test. Chain of custody intact. Interesting. But this doesn't automatically confer inheritance rights under Illinois probate law. Victoria crossed her arms. And what does her mother want, Ben? A slice of the estate? Or just enough to make headlines? She wants nothing, he snapped. She's dying, Victoria. Ovarian cancer. All she cares about is her daughter's future. Victoria's lips curved into a cold smile. Then she should have thought of that before seducing a married man. Ben's voice hardened. Peter wasn't married when he met Grace. You know that. Her eyes flashed. Don't you dare defend him. He lied to me about everything, and now his mess is yours. You think I'll let you ruin my husband's name with some convenient sob story? Ben took a step closer. This isn't about you or me. It's about Lily. She deserves recognition, support, and... Silence, Victoria hissed, her control cracking for the first time. Do you have any idea what this would do to my public image? To the board of the Harrison Foundation? To me? Ben stared at her, incredulous. Peter is dead, Victoria, and you're still performing for an audience. Her nails dug into her palms. You think you can play the hero? I built that foundation's name on his legacy. If you push this, you'll drag all of us into court, and I'll destroy whatever's left of that woman's reputation before it happens. He frowned. You'd attack a dying mother? Her tone was venomous. I'll do whatever it takes to protect what's mine. By the time Ben left Lincoln Park, his phone was already buzzing. Notifications flooded in. Gossip headlines from the Chicago Tribune's entertainment section, blogs and tabloid pages, CEO's brother's secret affair, illegitimate child surfaces. Grace Monroe, the gold digger nurse. Charity CEO faces family scandal. He scrolled through the chaos in disbelief. The articles quoted anonymous sources close to the Hale estate. Photos of Grace leaving the oncology clinic were splashed across every thumbnail. He knew exactly who had orchestrated it. Strategic communications warfare, a familiar tactic in his world. Only this time, it was personal. Ben called Grace immediately. Don't open the news, he said, voice tight. It's too late, she whispered. Lily saw it on a neighbor's phone. She asked me why people are calling me names. He closed his eyes, his voice breaking. I'll fix it. I promise. You can't fix optics, Ben, she murmured. Not when the story's already sold. He wanted to argue, but she was right. Once public opinion sank its teeth in, it didn't let go. He drove aimlessly through downtown, the glass towers reflecting back a man he barely recognized, one who used to care only about quarterly reports and shareholder optics. Now he was learning that the cost of truth wasn't just legal, it was human. At a red light, he saw Lily's drawing tucked into his dashboard, a stick figure family, now stained with coffee. Mommy. Lily. Angel Daddy. He whispered to himself, You wanted a fight, Victoria? Then you've got one. That night, Victoria sat in her immaculate kitchen, scrolling through her PR dashboard as the analytics spiked. Theodore poured her a drink. You've made your move, but Carter won't back down. She smiled faintly, swirling the amber liquid. Then we'll see how far he's willing to burn before he realizes not every truth deserves daylight. Outside, the wind rattled the trees of Lincoln Park, carrying with it the faint echo of a war that was no longer about inheritance, but about the soul of a family. The morning air over Wabash Avenue was thick with exhaust and scandal. Every newsstand, every cafe television, every glowing phone screen screamed the same headline. Charity CEO's family secret, the dying nurse and her child. Benjamin Carter had seen media storms before, corporate crises, product recalls, shareholder meltdowns. But this felt different. This one wasn't about balance sheets. It was about lives. He sat in his car outside University of Chicago Medicine, hands clenched on the steering wheel. He could see Grace through the glass doors, masked and frail, waiting with Lily for her next chemotherapy session. Photographers lingered nearby, pretending to check their cameras. He got out, anger building in his chest. Hey! Step back. he barked at a man kneeling with a telephoto lens. "You're violating patient privacy. This is a medical facility." The man smirked. "Public sidewalk, Mr. Carter. Freedom of the press." Ben took a step forward, his voice low but lethal. "You publish another shot of that child, and I'll see you in federal court under HIPAA and child protection statutes. You understand me?" The reporter hesitated, then backed away. But Ben knew more would come. There were always more. Inside, the oncology waiting room buzzed with murmurs. People glanced at Grace, the woman from the tabloids, then looked away. A nurse in pink scrubs approached quietly. "Ms. Monroe, we can move you to a private bay if you'd prefer." Grace nodded, avoiding the stares. When Ben entered, Lily ran to him. "They took pictures of Mommy again," she said, her small voice trembling. Ben knelt to meet her eyes. "I know, sweetheart. It's not fair. But we're going to fix it." Grace was silent, her hands folded in her lap. The IV line hung from her port, a slow drip of clear chemo fluid. "You can't fix optics, Ben," she said softly. "Not when the world already decided who we are." He sat beside her. "Then we'll show them something stronger than optics." Grace looked at him, weary but kind. "And what's that?" "Integrity," he said simply. "The one thing money can't buy back." That night, Grace's story appeared on late-night cable news. The segment showed blurred footage of her walking into the hospital, the narrator's voice dripping with irony. "The mysterious nurse claims her daughter is the heir to a multi-million-dollar estate." Ben watched in disgust. The next day, donations to the Harrison Foundation plummeted. Sponsors suspended contracts, and Victoria Hale went live on social media. "I have always believed in protecting family values. It breaks my heart to see my late husband's name used for profit by opportunists." The comment section exploded. Grace received hate mail in her building's mailbox. Anonymous messages called her a liar, a fraud, a homewrecker. Lily's school called to suggest temporary withdrawal for the child's well-being. That was the moment Grace broke. When Ben arrived that evening, she was sitting on the couch, trembling, her scarf undone, her eyes hollow. "I'm done, Ben," she whispered. "No more lawyers, no more interviews. I'll withdraw the petition." He froze. "Withdraw? Grace, this isn't just about money." "It's about peace," she said, voice shaking. "I'm dying, and I can't let Lily grow up under this kind of hate." Lily, standing in the hallway, had heard every word. She dropped her stuffed rabbit and whispered, "Mommy, don't cry." Grace's face crumpled. "I just want you to be happy, baby." Ben felt the ground tilt beneath him. Everything he'd built, the trust, the DNA, the moral clarity, was slipping away because of public cruelty. He moved closer, his tone steady. "Grace, if you give up now, Victoria wins. The story won't end. It'll just bury you under it. Let me handle the noise. You focus on getting better." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. The system always protects the powerful." Ben took her hand gently. "Then it's time someone powerful fights back for the powerless." 2 days later, he stood before the cameras outside Daly Center, not as the CEO of Carter Holdings, but as Benjamin Carter, legal guardian petitioner. The microphones flashed like lightning. "I will not comment on private medical matters," he began, his voice calm, deliberate. "But I will say this. Truth doesn't need to shout. It survives every lie, every headline, every scandal, because the truth belongs to those who endure." The video went viral overnight. Hashtags shifted. Supporters began to speak. Former patients Grace had helped as a nurse posted stories. She once stayed after hours to hold my hand through chemo. Others wrote, "She deserves compassion, not gossip." For the first time in weeks, the noise softened. In the apartment that night, Grace turned off the TV, exhausted. Ben sat beside her, holding her hand. "I didn't ask for a hero," she murmured. "I know," he said. "But maybe Lily deserves to see one." The city outside hummed quietly, the storm losing its edge. Grace closed her eyes, resting her head on his shoulder. For a fleeting moment, there was peace, not because the world had stopped attacking, but because they had chosen to stop running. The autumn light over Grant Park shimmered across the lakefront, soft and golden. For the first time in weeks, Grace was strong enough to walk outside. She wore a wool hat instead of her usual scarf, her pale skin tinted with faint color again. Ben pushed her wheelchair gently along the paved path while Lily skipped ahead, chasing a red balloon that danced in the breeze. "Slow down, sweetheart," Grace called out, smiling faintly. "I'm fine, Mommy. Look, it's flying." Lily's laughter echoed against the skyline, a sound so light it almost broke Ben's heart. He'd come to love these moments. They weren't about money or legal filings or DNA reports. They were about soup recipes, blankets warm from the dryer, and learning the quiet language of care. Every morning he came early to apartment 3C, measuring Grace's medications, cleaning her port, tracking her lab values like a man studying his own heartbeat. That day he'd packed sandwiches, a thermos of soup, and a small bottle of ondansetron, the antiemetic that kept Grace's nausea at bay. "Try to eat," he said softly, handing her a sandwich. "Your ANC is up, that's good news." She chuckled weakly. "You talk like a doctor now." "Just doing my homework," he replied. "The nurse said we can start planning your neutropenia precautions at home. I even bought air purifiers." Grace looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Ben, you don't have to do all this." He stopped walking. "Yes, I do." Her voice softened. "Why?" He hesitated, watching Lily run circles around a fountain. "Because for years I thought success meant control. But control didn't save Peter. It didn't stop him from making mistakes. And now, standing here, helping you, I finally feel human again." Her eyes glistened. "You think compassion is something you can learn?" "I think it's something you remember," he said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the city murmuring around them. A light breeze carried the scent of roasted nuts from a nearby vendor. Grace took a small bite of her sandwich and leaned back, eyes closed. "You know," she said after a pause, "when I first saw you at the hospital, I hated you." Ben smiled faintly. "That's fair. You walked in like every man I'd met at board meetings. Perfect tie, no soul. I thought, great, another one who thinks he can fix things with a check. And now?" She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "Now I think you're the only person who listens before he tries to fix them." Something warm flickered between them, quiet but unmistakable. It wasn't born of pity, it was born of shared exhaustion, of two people who had both lost and chosen to care anyway. Lily came running back, cheeks flushed. "Mommy, can we get ice cream later?" Grace smiled. "Maybe if I don't get tired." Ben looked at her. "Or maybe we'll all get one. Doctor's orders." Grace laughed for the first time in days, a fragile, genuine laugh that seemed to push the gray clouds back from the lake. When Lily darted off again, Grace grew quiet. "Ben," she said, her tone softer now, "if something happens to me, don't. Listen." She reached for his hand, thin and cold, but steady. "Promise me you'll make her feel safe, that she'll know love, not loss." Ben's throat tightened. "You're going to live," Grace. She smiled sadly. I'm going to fight. But even fighters need to know someone will carry the flag if they fall. He clasped her hand. Then I'll carry both of you. Their eyes met. Hers fragile but fierce, his full of the quiet conviction that only comes when guilt finds purpose. Behind them, the sun began to set, painting the lake in pink and gold. Lily ran back, holding a dandelion, her tiny fingers stretching toward them. Make a wish, Mommy. Grace blew gently, sending the white seeds drifting through the air. One landed on Ben's sleeve. She smiled. Guess it chose you. He laughed softly. Then I'll make it count. Later that evening, back at apartment 3C, Ben reheated soup while Grace dozed on the couch. Lily was drawing at the table, 3 figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Mommy, she said without looking up. I drew you, me, and Uncle Ben, but you're smiling in this one. Grace opened her eyes, watching her daughter's small hand trace a heart around their names. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Ben stood in the doorway, a quiet smile forming. The world outside could still be cruel, but in that little kitchen, smelling of soup, crayons, and second chances, something sacred was being rebuilt. The marble halls of the Richard J. Daley Center gleamed under fluorescent light. Reporters clustered near courtroom 1904, whispering into microphones as cameras flashed. It wasn't just a probate hearing anymore. It was a spectacle. Inside, the tension was heavy enough to taste. On one side sat Benjamin Carter, composed but pale in his tailored navy suit. Beside him, Grace Monroe, fragile in a soft gray dress and wool cap, her port hidden beneath a scarf. On the other sat Victoria Hale, immaculate in black, her lawyer Theodore Blackwood sorting a pile of exhibits with surgical precision. At the front, Judge Eleanor Whitman, known across Cook County for her sharp ethics and steady voice, adjusted her glasses. This court is convened to determine the parentage and inheritance rights of minor child Lily Monroe, alleged biological daughter of the late Peter Michael Harrison. The gavel struck once, echoing like a heartbeat. Daniel Kim, J.D., LLM, Ben's attorney, rose first. Your Honor, we will show clear genetic, circumstantial, and testimonial evidence establishing that the minor child is, in fact, Peter Harrison's daughter, and thus entitled to her lawful inheritance under the Illinois Parentage Act and Probate Code 755-5. Blackwood smirked. We contest both standing and intent. The late Mr. Harrison died intestate and no formal acknowledgement of paternity exists. The opposing party seeks to fabricate legacy for financial gain. The judge raised a hand. Enough posturing. Proceed. The courtroom's first witness was the genetic specialist from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The man adjusted his white coat as Daniel Kim began. Doctor, please confirm the results of the avuncular DNA analysis performed between Benjamin Carter and the minor child. Yes, the specialist said calmly. Chain of custody maintained. Probability of relatedness, 99.92%. Statistically conclusive that Mr. Carter is the child's biological uncle. Blackwood rose for cross-examination. Doctor, could contamination produce such results? The specialist smiled faintly. Not unless you replace the entire human genome. Murmurs rippled through the room. Next came Grace. She swore in, her voice trembling but resolute. I met Peter Harrison in 2017. We worked together at a hospital charity event. I didn't know who he really was until months later. Daniel asked gently, Did he acknowledge your pregnancy? Her eyes lowered. He did. He said he wanted to help, but his family was complicated. Then he stopped calling. I found out he was engaged to Victoria. I didn't want to destroy their lives, So I left. Blackwood rose sharply. So you admit you concealed the pregnancy? Yes, Grace said quietly. I was ashamed. But that doesn't change who Lily is. He circled her like a wolf. And now you stand to gain millions from this revelation. Grace looked up, voice trembling but clear. No. I stand to give my daughter a name that can't be erased. Even Judge Whitman paused before speaking. Proceed. During recess, Lily sat in the hallway, holding her stuffed rabbit. Her legs swung nervously off the bench. Uncle Ben, why do they talk about Mommy like she's bad? Ben knelt beside her. Because sometimes people are scared of the truth, sweetheart. But you know what? What? Courage means telling it anyway. She nodded solemnly, then whispered, Can I tell my truth too? Ben blinked. What do you mean? When they ask questions. I can tell them about Daddy. Mommy said he had a voice like music. His heart clenched. If the judge says it's okay, you can. When the recess ended, Daniel Kim approached the bench. Your Honor, we request that the minor child be allowed limited testimony under Rule 475, competency of child witnesses, as her statement may bear on the decedent's relationship and the child's best interest. Judge Whitman hesitated. Proceed carefully, Counselor. Lily was led to the witness stand, small and solemn, her feet not touching the floor. The courtroom fell silent. Do you know why you're here today, Lily? Daniel asked gently. She nodded. To talk about my daddy. Can you tell the judge what you remember? Lily looked toward Grace, then at Ben. Mommy said Daddy used to sing to me before I was born. She played me his songs when she missed him. I don't remember his face, but I know he loved us, because Mommy never lies. Even Victoria lowered her gaze. The courtroom was utterly still. Judge Whitman leaned forward. Thank you, Lily. That was very brave. When the bailiff helped her down, she ran straight into Ben's arms. He held her tightly, whispering, You did perfect, sweetheart. As the session adjourned, the crowd outside exploded into flashes and questions. But inside courtroom 1904, something sacred had shifted. Grace wept quietly. Daniel closed his file. Even Judge Whitman sat in silence longer than usual before leaving the bench. Ben looked at Victoria, whose face had hardened again, and said softly, You can't fight blood with fear, Victoria. The truth is already standing. She didn't reply, but for the first time, her confidence looked like armor cracking. The sky above downtown Chicago was a dull gray the morning the verdict was read. A cold wind swept between the high-rises, rattling the flags that hung over the Richard J. Daley Center. Inside courtroom 1904, every seat was filled. Reporters, lawyers, onlookers, and one small girl clutching her stuffed rabbit. Judge Eleanor Whitman entered, her black robe swaying softly as the bailiff called the room to order. All rise. Grace stood slowly, her hands trembling. Ben placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. On the opposite table, Victoria Hale sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the bench. Her lawyer Theodore Blackwood whispering last-minute words that sounded like threats disguised as advice. The judge began, her tone measured. This court has reviewed the evidence, the genetic findings, and the testimonies presented. Under Illinois parentage and probate statutes, and pursuant to the best interest of the child standard, I hereby render the following decision. You could hear hearts pounding. The court finds substantial evidence that the minor child, Lily Monroe, is the biological daughter of the late Peter Michael Harrison. Accordingly, the court awards the child 50% of the decedent's intestate estate, to be held in an irrevocable trust administered by her paternal uncle, Benjamin Carter, as trustee. The trust shall include spendthrift provisions to safeguard the minor's financial interest and shall permit disbursements for educational, medical, and welfare needs, particularly those pertaining to Ms. Grace Monroe's ongoing medical care. The gavel struck once. This decision is final and enforceable as of today. For a second, silence hung like glass. Then Lily gasped, "Mommy, does that mean we won?" Grace's tears fell before she could answer. Ben smiled faintly, whispering, "Yes, sweetheart, you won." But across the aisle, Victoria Hale rose from her chair, trembling with rage. Her perfectly composed mask shattered. "This is absurd!" she shouted. "That woman lied! She manipulated everyone!" Judge Whitman's voice cut through the noise. "Ms. Hale, control yourself or I will hold you in contempt." Victoria ignored her, pointing at Grace. "You think this changes anything? She's a fraud. My husband loved me, not some charity nurse." The courtroom gasped. Security moved forward, but Victoria stepped closer to the bench, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this, all of you. I'll appeal, The gavel slammed down. "Ms. Hale, you are now in contempt of court." She didn't stop. "You'll destroy his legacy over some pity story." "Bailiff!" The bailiff restrained her as she tried to pull free. "Get your hands off me!" she screamed, striking his arm. Cameras flashed wildly. Judge Whitman's voice was ice. "Remove her from this courtroom, now!" As Victoria was escorted out, shouting incoherently, Grace covered Lily's eyes. Ben watched in silence, sorrow and relief mixing like water and fire in his chest. When the room emptied, Judge Whitman looked at Ben. "Mr. Carter, as trustee, you understand your fiduciary duty to act solely in the best interest of the minor?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You'll work with the estate's financial officers to structure the trust. I suggest including a survivorship clause for Ms. Monroe's medical coverage under Community Health Partnership Act 520. Ben nodded firmly. "Already planned." The judge softened. "Then good luck to all of you. This courtroom sees too much greed. It's rare to witness love winning for once." She rose and left the bench quietly. Outside, the flashbulbs were blinding. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to win?" "Will the trust include Grace Monroe's treatment?" "Is Victoria Hale under arrest?" Ben shielded Grace and Lily with his coat, guiding them down the steps. "No comments," he said firmly. When they reached the car, Grace exhaled, trembling. "It's over," she whispered. Ben shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." Lily leaned from the back seat, holding out her rabbit. "Mommy, the judge said you can get medicine now, right?" Grace smiled through tears. "Yes, baby. We'll be okay." As they drove along Lakeshore Drive, the city skyline glowed in the distance. Grace's head rested lightly against the window. "You know, Ben," she said softly, "I used to think justice was just a word lawyers used. But today, I felt it." He looked at her, eyes warm. "Justice isn't perfect, Grace, but sometimes it remembers who it's supposed to serve." She smiled faintly. "And who do you serve, Mr. Carter?" He thought for a moment. "My family." That night, the news aired footage from the courtroom, Victoria being restrained, the judge's ruling, and Ben escorting Grace and Lily out. But what trended wasn't the chaos. It was a still photo. Lily clutching her rabbit, smiling shyly up at Ben as he guided her down the courthouse stairs. The caption read, "Love wins where money failed." The first snow fell over Streeterville like a sigh, soft, hesitant, The kind of snowfall that makes the city seem to breathe again after months of noise. Inside Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the world was quieter. The monitors hummed softly. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint sweetness of winter air drifting in through a cracked window. Grace Monroe sat by that window, her scarf replaced by a knitted cap Lily had made at school. The color didn't match anything, bright yellow and unevenly stitched, but she wore it like a crown. When Dr. Alan Reynolds, her oncologist, entered with a thick folder, Ben stood up instantly. "Well?" he asked. Dr. Reynolds smiled. "CT scans clear, no measurable lesions, no ascites, no metabolic activity on PET. Grace, there's no evidence of disease." Grace blinked, unable to speak. Ben gripped the chair for balance. "Ned," the doctor said gently. "It means remission." The word hung in the air like a miracle. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Are you sure?" The doctor nodded. "We'll keep you on a surveillance schedule, every 3 to 6 months. But for now," he smiled, "you get to live." Lily squealed from her corner of the room. "Mommy, that means you're not sick anymore." Grace pulled her close, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ben turned away for a moment, his eyes wet. When the doctor left, Grace looked up at him. "Ben, we made it." He smiled through his tears. "No, you made it." That evening, they walked along the lakefront trail, the city glittering behind them. The air was sharp but clean. Ben carried 2 cups of hot chocolate. Lily skipped between them, holding both their hands. "I don't remember the last time I saw the lake this blue," Grace said softly. "It's the same lake," Ben replied. "You just get to see it with clear eyes now." She smiled. "You talk like a man who's finally breathing again." He laughed. "Maybe I am. You know, after the verdict, I realized something. Money, power, reputation, they're all just mirrors. They show you nothing unless someone else's reflection is in them." Grace looked at him quietly. "And whose reflection do you see now?" He hesitated, then took her hand. "Yours." She didn't pull away. They reached a small stone bench overlooking the frozen harbor. Lily climbed onto it, holding her stuffed rabbit up toward the sky. "Mommy! Uncle Ben! Make a wish!" Grace chuckled. "You have too many wishes, little one." "Then I'll share," Lily said seriously. "Half for you, half for him." Ben grinned. "That's a good deal." Later that night in their modest apartment, the air was filled with quiet laughter and the clink of plates. Ben had burned the grilled cheese again, and Grace teased him mercilessly for it. "Carter Holdings can manage a billion-dollar merger," she said between giggles. "But you can't toast bread without a crisis." He shrugged. "Every empire needs its flaw." Lily ran up with a folded paper in her hand. "Look what I made." It was a crayon drawing of a house. 3 stick figures under a roof, their names written in crooked letters, Mommy, Ben, and me. Grace blinked, her smile trembling. "Sweetheart, what's this?" "Our home," Lily said. "Because Uncle Ben said family is who shows up every day." Ben knelt down beside her. "That's right. And guess what?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace froze. "Ben." He opened it. Inside, a simple silver ring, delicate and understated. "I've spent most of my life signing contracts, but this is the only one I want to keep." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do this out of gratitude." He shook his head. It's not gratitude. It's love, Grace. Quiet, stubborn, and real. The kind that doesn't need promises. It just needs presence. Lily's mouth fell open. You mean you're gonna be my dad for real? Ben smiled, voice breaking. If your mom says yes. Grace laughed through her tears. Then I guess she'd be crazy to say no. Ben slipped the ring onto her trembling hand. For a moment, the entire world seemed to still. The sound of snow against the window, the faint hum of the radiator, the warmth of a home that had been fought for in blood and faith. Lily threw her arms around them both. I told you! My wish came true! That night, Grace sat by the window while Ben tucked Lily into bed. The city lights glittered like stars scattered across the lake. She whispered to herself, no evidence of disease. Then, looking toward the bedroom door where laughter echoed softly, she added, no evidence of loneliness either. Spring returned to Chicago with a quiet grace. The air smelled of lilacs and wet earth, the kind of air that promised things could begin again. On a tree-lined street in Ravenswood, sunlight spilled through the windows of a two-story house with white shutters and a garden full of tulips. The house had once belonged to a retired schoolteacher. Now it belonged to the Carters. A wooden sign on the porch read, Welcome Home. Inside, laughter echoed down the hallway. Lily, now 8, ran in her new white dress, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Mommy! Uncle! No! Daddy! They're here! Grace smiled from the kitchen doorway, her cheeks glowing with the color of health. She wore a soft blue dress, her wedding ring glinting in the light. On the counter were flowers, a half-iced cake, and a folder labeled Lily Foundation. Inaugural Grant Program. Ben came in from the garden, sleeves rolled up, still learning how to handle gardening gloves. You're early, Grace teased. Board meetings start at 9, he said, kissing her temple. But planting tulips with my wife takes priority. She laughed. You still call it priority management, even here. Once a CEO, always a CEO, he said. Except now the board of directors is you and one very bossy 8-year-old. Hey, Lily shouted, giggling. I heard that. As afternoon settled in, friends and neighbors gathered in the backyard. There was no media, no photographers, no headlines, just a table covered with homemade food and a banner strung between 2 trees. Lily Foundation Launch Day. Ben stepped forward, holding a microphone. Thank you all for coming. 2 years ago, this family stood in a courtroom fighting for one little girl's right to exist. Today, that same little girl is the reason dozens of other children will get medical support their families couldn't afford. He gestured toward Grace, who stood beside him, radiant. This foundation began with Grace's dream, to make sure no parent has to choose between treatment and dignity. We're starting with a small endowment, focused on grants for single mothers facing medical crises, in partnership with Cook County Health and the Community Care Program. Applause rippled through the crowd. Grace wiped away tears. We just want to give back the kindness that once saved us. Lily tugged Ben's sleeve. Can I say something, Daddy? He smiled and handed her the mic. The little girl looked at the crowd, her voice soft but clear. My mommy got better because people cared, so I want to help other mommies too. That's why we call it the Lily Foundation, because love can grow again, like flowers. The backyard fell silent for a moment before the applause swelled again, warm and genuine. Grace knelt and hugged her daughter tightly. As evening came, the guests drifted home. Fireflies blinked between the trees. Grace sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea while Ben locked up the gate. The scent of fresh soil lingered in the air. She's going to change the world, Grace said softly. Ben joined her on the swing. She already changed ours. They watched Lily chasing the last of the fireflies across the yard. "You ever think about how far we've come?" Grace asked. "From back of the yards to here?" He nodded. "I think about it every day. That apartment taught me what success really costs, and what it's worth when you find someone to share it with." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "You kept your promise." "Which one?" "To make her feel safe. To make us feel safe." He smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "You did the hard part. I just learned to follow your lead." From inside the house, a soft melody began to play. Lily at the old upright piano Ben had restored. Her small voice rose over the notes. "Home isn't marble or gold. It's hands that hold, and hearts that stay." Grace looked up at Ben, eyes glistening. "She wrote that herself?" He nodded. "She said it's for Peter." They fell silent, listening. Somewhere deep inside, grief and peace finally touched hands. Later, as the house grew quiet, Ben stepped outside. The garden lights glowed softly along the path. He glanced at the bronze plaque near the tulip bed. The Lily Foundation, founded in honor of Grace and Lily Carter, because justice means nothing without compassion. He whispered to the night, "We did it, Peter." Behind him, Grace appeared in the doorway, her hair catching the warm light. "Come inside, Ben, it's getting cold." He turned, smiling. "In a minute. I just wanted to look at what love built." She reached out her hand. "Then come share it." He took her hand, and together they stepped back into the glow of their home. Through the window, Lily waved before pulling the curtains closed, the piano still humming softly. The night settled over Ravenswood, gentle, forgiving, and full of promise. And for the first time in years, Benjamin Carter finally understood. Justice may have saved their lives, but love had built their legacy. If this story touched you, if you believe that compassion can rebuild what loss once took, thank you for staying until the very end. Every view, every comment, every shared moment reminds us that kindness still moves the world. Please subscribe and stay with us for the next journey, because somewhere out there another story of hope, healing, and second chances is waiting to be told. Love heals. Always.